You've heard AM, you've heard FM. Now, tune into DM Radio, the world's longest running show about data. Each week, host Eric Kavanaugh interviews the brightest minds in the world of information management. Want to be on the show? Send an email to info@dmradio.biz. Now, here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here, and an all-star cast, folks. I'm so excited. And the topic is a hot one, Silver Linings Abound. We're going to talk all about the cloud computing, the evolution of cloud computing. We'll talk about, of course, cloud, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, but also metacloud and the supercloud. We're going to hear from several great experts today. We've got my good buddy, David Linthicum, one of the most well-respected cloud experts in the world on the show today. We'll also hear from Ben Haynes from a company called Directus, doing some very interesting things. We have Ryo Shimizu from a company called Beacon, and also Tammy Butow is joining us as well from Statype. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So hybrid cloud just means you have on-prem, your data center, you have some cloud solution, you have to reconcile between those two. We very quickly moved from hybrid cloud to multi-cloud because guess what? There are many clouds. You've got Amazon, of course, which is still the 800-pound gorilla in the field. I think they still have the vast majority of revenue. They still have tremendous momentum. But nipping at their heels is a company called Microsoft with Azure. They went all in, hats off to Satya Nadella for really pushing that forward. And then, of course, the Google Cloud platform. But they're not the only three. There are lots of other players in the cloud space, and there are also edge players in the space. So lots of data centers cropping up around the country and around the world to facilitate edge computing. So it's all out there. And since we have so many guests, I'm going to dive right in and bring in our good buddy, David Linthicum. David, tell us about what you're working on and what's this super cloud all about? It sounds cool.
It's a conversation I'm having 6 times a day now, including today. Well, also, I'm working on really how we're going to mediate these complex architectures. If you think about it, over the last 5 years, we've gotten into a complexity problem. In other words, we're building multiple clouds and now adding edge computing on and AI systems, things like that. A lot of things aren't going away. And therefore, we're moving from, say, 3,000 services under management to 10,000 services under management. So how do you mediate that complexity? Of course, you can spend more money, or companies don't want to do that for a good reason, or figure out approaches and different technologies to do it on your behalf. And we came out, we're talking about cloud complexity management 5 years ago, and really kind of talking about an aggregation of these services where we're dealing with automation and abstraction to normalize them. So it reduces a lot of the redundancy of these various systems. It may still have the complexity behind the scenes, but we're able to operate and manage it and secure it and govern it in a much more efficient way.
Yeah, that's very interesting because you figure there's a lot of redundancy across clouds. And, you know, we were talking just last week on a show, and I thought to myself a long time ago, if I have all of my services in AWS, for example, because there are like 7,000 sales and marketing technologies now that are offered as software as a service. We're talking thousands and thousands of different services. If they're all in an Amazon cloud, is there some way to optimize the compute, the orchestration, all that fun stuff? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
That is, but it also has a tendency to, it can move across clouds. Not only are optimizing compute and storage and databases and AI systems and BI analytic systems within a single cloud environment, we're doing so across cloud environments. So in other words, we're finding the best service that's able to service the particular task that we're looking for at the best price and the most efficient way to do it, and also the best of breed services that matches up the needs. So it does a couple of things. Number one, it makes the intra-cloud stuff much more efficient because it's able to deal with automation and abstraction across these various services. But the more important thing is the intra-cloud services, that's where the complexity comes in. So you hit the nail on the head. Instead of dealing with 3 different security layers and 3 different governance layers and 3 different FinOps layers, I'm dealing with a single layer that may need at certain times to access the native layers on the back end, but that's hidden from you. So we're dealing with one master automation system, one master sets of APIs, and we're dealing with storage and security and all these things using the same interface across cloud systems, intercloud, intercloud, and it just makes things less complex and easier to manage.
Yeah, the proverbial single pane of glass, right, which has been long sought in this environment. It makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. That's very interesting. And just real quick, can you give us some details on how that's done? Like, how do you achieve this single pane of glass and this super cloud vision? Is it another technology or sort of an amalgam of technologies?
That's a great question, Eric. The reality is that it's a suite of technologies. It's an architecture into itself. And there really is no one of the things when I write about supercloud and metacloud, people always say, well, we have this technology. It's existed for years. No, you don't. Ultimately, this is a suite of technologies that solve particularly unique problems that are customized for each of the domains. So in other words, we're going to have to leverage AI ops, typically is going to be in a supercloud architecture, security management, identity access management, cross-cloud governance, cross-cloud data abstraction, and data management systems. All these sorts of things are really kind of in this stack. And by the way, it may run any number of places. It could run on different cloud providers. It doesn't matter, but it logically exists physically above the clouds. And I think in doing that, it solves a bunch of problems that we have kind of accumulated over the years. And the idea is, basically to deploy whatever technology we need for the problem domains we need. So there is a one size fits all solution. In my latest book, I kind of wrote, I think in 5 years, there is going to be a productized supercloud and metacloud, because I think that's just kind of the way things move. And it probably is going to be a large cloud provider that takes over that area. So they become kind of a cross cloud service provider unto themselves. But right now, it's unique to the domain, it's unique to your requirements, and it's going to be different technologies depending on the super and meta cloud that you're looking to build for the particular multi-cloud problem domain.
Yeah, that's very interesting stuff. And one of our other guests knew a thing or two about multi-cloud, so I'll throw it over to you first, Rio Shimizu from Beacon. Tell us what you're working on and what you think about this multi-cloud, or this super cloud, meta cloud stuff.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of buzz around the topic, and as I understand it, there's quite a bit of confusion around what the terms actually mean. But if you go with this, David's notion that there exists a layer that sits above the cloud, and one that abstracts away the idiosyncrasies of the cloud vendors, and provides a common runtime environment which leverages large-scale elastic capacity and provides for things like process integration, orchestration, observability, security, and governance, and so on and so forth that enterprise customers care about. Yeah, I think that's a thing.
Yeah, and so what are you doing at Beacon? I think you're in financial services, right? And that's a pretty important place to be. And we want to make sure that our money is safe, that, and David even referenced identity resolution, I think, which is obviously very important in the cloud, because who is this person who's trying to access all this money? Is it the right person? Is it not the right person? What do we do about that? Tell us a bit about Beacon and what you folks are working on.
Yeah, we make a sort of a cloud abstraction layer almost. So my name is Kirat Singh, and I'm the SVP of engineering at Beacon. I joined Beacon 6 years ago as the founding member of the Tokyo business, and more recently I moved over to New York to help support our global business. Prior to Beacon, I was at Goldman Sachs for 10 years, where I built and ran their equities franchise market making desk. And before that, I was a software engineer at a company called The MathWorks, writing software that engineers make use of daily. So I'm an engineer by training, and I enjoy solving business challenges using software.
Sure, and Goldman Sachs is managing a lot of money, so they take that stuff very, very seriously. So security is important. Identity resolution, as I mentioned, is very important. That's the other really interesting angle I've been waiting for someone to solve. And you think about Microsoft could solve it, Facebook theoretically could solve it, LinkedIn could solve it. There are some very big players that really focus their business on knowing who you are. LinkedIn, of course, is paramount among them, I guess. And yet no one seems to be making a play for that. I do know a number of companies that are working on it. There are concepts like decentralized ID, for example. A company called CrowdPoint is working on that. But what are your thoughts on solving that conundrum of who I am and how I can prove who I am to other people? Like, wouldn't you ideally want almost this big key value store in the sky that knows who I am and knows who my decentralized ID is? What do you think about all that?
That's right. I think, somebody like, I think Microsoft or AD is kind of taking over that space quite a bit with their AD tenant. So from our perspective, we're a service provider for those identity providers. So we don't really care who provides that identity, so long as you authenticate yourself and claim we know who you are, and you are the person you say you are. Then we'll kind of assume that's the case, and then we'll kind of allow you in.
Okay, that's kind of interesting, because it is important to know who's who out there, right? I mean, you've got Active Directory, you have various technologies that have been around for a long time, role-based stuff where you kind of dial in. But in this new Kubernetes-enabled world, I'm sure there are services for identity resolution. Can you talk to that at all?
We don't quite work in that space, but I'm sure other people have a better solution there as well.
All right, no worries. Let's go around the room. Tammy Butow from a company called Statype. You folks are fresh out of the gate doing some really interesting stuff on analytics and analytics kind of out of the box, right? Tell us a bit about what you're working on and how cloud plays a role.
Yeah, hi there. Great to be here. Yeah, I'm Tammy Butow, and at Statype, we're working on a ready-built platform for B2B SaaS to be able to see all of their data. There's a lot of key data there, like NDR, ARR, churn, things that you really, don't want to spend years and years and, get a giant data team to build for you in-house. We thought this could be a product. And I have a long history of working in the cloud. I actually first started my career in tech working in a data center, as some of us have, back in early 2000s. And then I started to hear about the cloud, and I thought I really want to start actually being part of building the cloud. So in 2009, 2010, I was able to actually be on a project at the National Australia Bank where we migrated to the cloud for nab.com.au, which was one of the first banks to move to the cloud. And we also started to do chaos engineering in the cloud using Netflix Chaos Monkey, super early, first bank in the world to do that. And, really just testing the reliability of the cloud. So it's been a fun journey. Then from there, I went to work at DigitalOcean, actually building out a cloud that developers totally love. And it was really cool to be a part of that experience. People love using DigitalOcean. It was fun to see developers, if they love something, they'll just do it over and over and build some really amazing products and tools and software. And yeah, that's the journey that I've been on. And then after that, I went to work at Gremlin and did chaos engineering in the cloud for big banks like JPMC, Target, tons of great companies that are actually doing that with Gremlin. And now I'm at Statype and I'm the VP of product here, where we're really focused on aggregating data across all of the cloud, bringing it together in one place. I love this idea of the supercloud too. I also worked at Dropbox and I managed the storage team there and databases as an engineering leader. And we actually had built something called Cloudbox, which was our own internal way to get servers from either Dropbox's own on-prem data centers or from Amazon. You could just be Cloudbox, I want a server. And then we'd monitor both of them through the same one single glass pane, to see all the monitoring and alerts. But this is not a product that just exists out in the market. It's not easy to do. It took years to build that, a big team to maintain it. So I'm excited to see where that goes.
Yeah, and I love that you're doing this massive cloud integration work where you're kind of pulling from all sorts of different sources and then dynamically generating basic insights like annual recurring revenue, for example, and some other basic things that everyone wants. I said before the show, you reminded me of the guys from Empirity who talk about their highly biased data pipelines, which I find rather interesting because if you start from a certain perspective, that helps you see the world from that view. Now you can change your perspective and see the world from a different view, but it does help in business to kind of know where you're going and know what you're trying to accomplish. So I think that's a very clever approach that you've taken. And so far it's going pretty well.
Yes, it's going really well. Part of my role at Gremlin, I did a lot of different roles. I started as a principal engineer. Eventually, I was also leading customer success there too. One of the things I needed to keep an eye on was our core business metrics in terms of renewals, expansions, churn, making sure that we were doing well as a business. As I was there, we dramatically improved our ARR and actually hit 10 million ARR. Public knowledge, it's in the press, I'm allowed to say that. But that was a great milestone to achieve as a Series B startup. And a lot of it actually was me writing a ton of SQL and doing data-driven analysis about the customers. How many customer success directors or leaders know how to write SQL? Not many. How many know their way around the Salesforce database schema? Not many. Very difficult to learn. So we're just thinking SQL is an outdated technology for a lot of people. It's difficult to learn if people don't know it. A lot of product managers don't know SQL, customer success don't know it, but you kind of need it in a lot of ways. So we're building a platform where you don't need to know SQL to be able to get those key insights. What are your customers doing? How are they performing? Who's about to expand? What's going on with your business? Let's mash product data, revenue data, customer data, marketing, and sales data all together to give you that high level overview in the one place and be able to get insights in minutes, just quickly looking and seeing how is things going.
Yeah. That's very cool stuff, and it's an evolution, right? So you're learning from the mistakes of others and building a solution that gets you right to the magic. Don't have to worry about all the data engineering stuff or writing code. That's very cool. Low code analytics
Yeah.
solution that looks at all your data. And last but not least, we have Ben Haynes from Directus waiting in the background, waiting in the wings. Tell us a bit about yourself real quick and what you see evolving in this metacloud, supercloud world.
Sure. Thanks, Eric. So Ben Haynes, I'm a co-founder and CEO at Directus. I've been a designer and a developer my whole life. I ran an IT consultancy out of New York City where, building out projects for Google and Prada, Snapchat, US government, SoulCycle, et cetera, and identified, some pretty big bottlenecks in how we're developing things, a lot of repetitive engineering for authentication, connectivity, et cetera, and built out an open source platform 18 years ago that is still what I'm working on today, of course, much more formally. That platform essentially democratizes the database. So any SQL database with strong database abstraction, we're giving engineers the tools that they are building repetitively. Again, authentication, access control, automation, transactional email services, APIs dynamically generated based on the schema, but also a no-code app that democratizes it for non-technical users. So they can log in, they can browse, manage, visualize, automate their data without, to Tammy's point, without having to know SQL, without having to, put a ticket into IT to have them go run a report or anything like that. So allowing them to self-service and that idea of citizen IT, everybody being able to access this data that was traditionally locked behind the doors of IT. So that's really what we're doing right now. We support every SQL database out there through strong abstraction. In our next version, which is imminent, we're looking at expanding our abstraction to NoSQL, Mongo, flat files in Excel, other APIs. And of course, all this leads to the idea of federating or virtualizing the data across these data sources. So beyond infrastructure provisioning and orchestration, we're looking at the data side. How can you take these disparate data sources, bring them to a single pane of glass, and give you a really simple, safe, and intuitive interface so that everybody can access that data within their system?
Yeah, that's cool. Citizen, what did you call it? Citizen IT.
Citizen IT. So I basically, everyone knows how expensive and hard to come by, the technical folks on a team are. They're overwhelmed and overloaded. Trying to build out reports, trying to get data and run queries and build out systems to support the other teams. Our platform is agnostic and unopinionated. It is not a domain specific. It's not for customer data or inventory or leasing or content for an experience. It is a layer on top of the database. So whatever you have in your database, we introspect that schema and we provide all these tools, REST, GraphQL APIs, documentation, and a full no-code experience based on your database. So whatever your database is, you're going to get a full suite of software for it.
Yeah, that's very cool. I love, again, that sort of pan vision where you're trying to simplify. We'll talk about that in the next segment when we bring David Linthicum back. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back, folks. You are listening to DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, back here on DM Radio. What a fantastic show talking metacloud and supercloud. I love this. I mean, wow, we're finally getting somewhere with orchestrating these incredibly powerful cloud computing environments. I mean, really, you think about where we've come in the last 20 years, and it's fascinating. And longer than that even too, right? You go back 1997, even 1990. 2 and 1 was Prodigy, right? So this stuff has been around a long time, but I feel like in the last 10 years in particular, there has been just a stupendous amount of innovation as we have many more engineers working on scale out architectures. And anyone who does that kind of work will tell you it's a whole different set of challenges from the original things of trying to stand up a database, for example, or stand up a graph database, which can be a pain. But when you're dealing at these levels, at this scale out architecture level, it's just a whole different ballgame. And now we have tens of thousands of engineers who know a lot about that stuff, and they're very focused and very intent on solving particular problems. And the problem that erupts is complexity. And I'll throw it over to David Linthicum again, our resident cloud expert. Complexity is a killer. I mean, complexity will take down a business. It'll cost you money. It'll cost you headaches. It kills morale. And some of the work that you're talking about today is going to help us manage that complexity and get to the simplicity that the business wants, right, David?
Yeah, it'll kill your business. There's even a name for it. It's called the complexity wall. And many enterprises are hitting it now. And that's everything we just talked about in the last segment. They're just adding more services on because they need them to choose them for their best of breed services. So instead of, 6 different databases, we have 25. Instead of, 2 AI levels, we have 10. And the reason that we're adding this on is because number one, we can provision them at the speed of need via the cloud. They're fairly cheap, and we can just pile on service after service after service to make it happen. The trouble comes in when we operationalize this. And so in other words, those who are developing the systems, integrating the systems, and architecting the systems are turning this over to the cloud ops team. And the reality is they don't have all the skills they need to operate these systems. They don't have skills to operate 22 different databases and 6 different AI systems, things like that. And so the cost goes up, they hit the complexity wall, and it's absolutely killing a business. And so the CIOs do one of the 2 things. Number one, they say, no more adding additional cloud services on. We're going to leverage these sets of services, and that's going to be it. That's obviously a bad thing to do.
Right.
Or they try to get the additional budget to solve the problem. Also a bad thing to do. Or the thing that we're recommending here on the show is that they mediate complexity through architectural trickery and being clever and using the technology that we have. And that's kind of the whole idea behind supercloud and metacloud.
Yeah, I love this quote you just gave, the gospel note, where is it? You can re-provision at the speed of need. You've said that a few times, huh?
Yes. Yeah, and we have an abundance of choice. My CIO friends out there, and I talked to a lot of them, they just say that this is a different world where it was 15 years ago. It took 6 months to a year to provision particular services and applications. Everybody has a credit card now. Doesn't matter if they're in IT or not. They provision what they need to solve the problems that they need at the speed of need. There you go. Another one, and ultimately causing the complexity problem because they turn everything back to IT to manage, and they can't do it.
That's interesting. Yeah, and the data engineers, these are the folks that are typically pulling their hair out if they have hair left, unlike guys like me, right? Because a lot of times the business just doesn't fully understand the impact and the drudgery of the complexity. I'll throw it over to you, David, and then I'll bring in Rio again to comment on that. This is part of the challenge, right? Is that, and what's kind of interesting is that we went from this world of business versus IT, and then DevOps came around, and all of a sudden you have developers involved. And that, I think that kind of mitigated a bit of the chasm between the business and IT, but also added another layer of complexity, right? And now in the cloud, it's a different set of challenges. It's not the same old challenges you had managing your on-prem data center, but it's a different set of challenges that are similar, especially when you proliferate the services, because now someone has to manage all this stuff. Who's going to do that? And that's the sort of grinding problem that we're facing in the world right now, right, David?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what we're hitting right now in 2023. And that's why people are focused on things like metacloud and supercloud and AI ops and cross-cloud services, cross-cloud database management, as a way to kind of throw a life preserver as to people who are drowning in this complexity issue right now. And complexity causes a real problem. Other than additional expenses, it raises security risk, it causes outages and performance issues. It really gets into core IT issues that go back into IT, not necessarily serving the business. So it's never going to be a good thing. It's always going to be very costly, but it has some huge catastrophic risks that come around it as well.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Huge catastrophic risk. I'll throw it over to Rio to comment on, where the challenge and the fun part, I guess, of being in this world of metacloud and supercloud is that there are all these options you can choose, but they all have their pluses and minuses, and you need people who can kind of suss all that out and understand which direction to go. What's your advice when you work with your clients? What do you recommend, and how do you deal with this growing complexity, Rio?
Well, so we kind of use a opinionated set of architectures and best practices that we've sort of gained over our experiences at working at big banks, and provide a common sort of a set of tools and services that people should use. And we kind of present that as a single sort of a package solution, so that people don't have to worry about going here for this or going somewhere else for these sort of things. And then we'll just provide that base layer as a package is kind of like our approach.
Yeah, the highly opinionated platform, right?
Yeah.
No, that's good. And you say, look, we're going to go this direction. It does what we want it to do. We'll examine other opportunities as they come along, but you're the ones curating the platform and you're the ones delivering the service, right? So that's the magic.
Exactly.
Is, look, we know this works, so we're going to do it this way until such time comes as something changes, right?
That's right, and it's a constantly evolving platform as well. So as when we see new technologies emerging, we'll kind of assimilate into the platform itself.
Ah, yes, the Borg. You too will be assimilated. I'll throw it over to Tammy to kind of comment on, and you folks have really addressed this with your whole business model of simplifying the whole process, so you don't have to. It's like if you think about fixing cars. It used to be that any number of mechanics could work on any number of different cars because the parts were fairly simple and the engines were fairly simple. Now we're in an age of hyper specialization around the cars where you need specialized tools and specialized knowledge to work on all these things. And so you don't have the person who can work on any number of cars anymore. It's either you're a Honda or you're a foreign car, a BMW. And that's an interesting development in the marketplace. But the consumers, I just want my car to work. I don't care what's going on under the cover. I want this stuff to work. And that's kind of the approach you took on analytics of saying, look, why do you want to saddle your team with standing up all these individual systems, setting up all the ETL, setting up all the data pipelines, all that stuff? That's a whole heck of a lot of work. And that's the engineering work to get to the point where you can start doing the analysis, which is why you built the whole thing in the first place, right? Go ahead.
Exactly. Yeah, that brings back memories of me. I used to fix my own car, like back when I was, 15 years old, something like that. Back in the 90s, it was easy to do. And now I just can't imagine like trying to fix an electric car, just not something that I would even want to try and do. But a lot of it really is like, goes back to the complexity that David and Rio talked about, because it is difficult, right? Like if I personally have like learned a lot of different types of tooling, like database schemas. So like I know Salesforce really well, I know HubSpot really well, I know Stripe really well, and I've learned them over the last like 10 plus years. It's taken me a long time to understand these schemas, learn how the databases work, learn what the issues are, learn how different tables work with each other. Like that's not something you can just pick up quickly. And if someone says to you, tell me what my churn is by next week because we've got a board meeting, you're like, oh shit, like, oops, not supposed to swear. Say, oh no, like what do we do in that situation? Because you need to deliver it really fast, and building out all of those pipelines, understanding all of those different systems, merging that data together, actually aggregating it together, and then giving back that report on churn. Like I've been asked to do that myself in jobs in the past. It really is a lot of work if you don't have those skills. And I also strongly believe that whatever role you're in, you should be able to use the tools that you need to use. So for example, you're in marketing, like pick the tools that work best for you, and also feel comfortable that you can pick new tools and add those to your toolbox. It's just like a plumber, a carpenter, an electrician. They all have different tools because they need different tools to do their job. And it makes a lot of sense to me. Like I think we should be allowed to be different, allowed to use different tools, like pick up new things, try them out, see what works. So the platform that we're building, it enables you to quickly ingest your data sources. And if you switch, say if you go, I'm using Stripe right now, I want to switch to something else next week, we can say, cool, that's cool. Let's just grab your API credentials. We'll now ingest your new data source. You'll have all of your historical data from Stripe, and then we'll also ingest your new data that you have. So you don't lose that too. Like that's a big issue in the data space. Where you just like go, okay, we're switching from like mixed panel to Pendo. Now I don't have any historical data.
Right.
And I've been there before and it's terrible. Yeah.
Well, that was almost a perfect segue for Ben Haynes, because that's exactly what they're working on over at Directus, right? Ben, is to say, look, you have X amount of databases in production right now. They all have a different set of functionality, but they're doing what they're supposed to do. And you don't want to rip and replace, to Tammy's point, because every time you do that, something's going to get lost in the shuffle, whether it's fields or records, or maybe it's just the schema is different and it doesn't work properly. There are lots of bad things that can happen, which is why you don't rip and replace. That's why sunsetting applications or sunsetting databases is extremely rare in the enterprise. But you kind of stepped up above that with this layer of abstraction to be able to manage all those different environments and let companies still use what they're already using, right? Is that about right, Ben?
That's exactly right. So I think, to Tammy's point, you have to enable the engineering teams to have a flexible technology stack, something that is what they're used to working with within their expertise, what the project or company requirements dictate. But of course, that is extremely broad. As David mentioned, there's this huge, swath of options out there, which is great. That's really important to have, but you need to be able to bridge the gap from that optionality to some sort of standard IO, some way that we can interface, we can have specifications, that we can actually rely on the integrations of these microservices through abstraction. So we're, again, bringing together disparate databases wherever they might be. Again, not requiring you to migrate them. You can keep them in situ exactly as it was. We're not changing your schema or your architecture. We're just giving you tools on top of it. So if you weren't able to find a solution with, the specific use case you had, and you built something bespoke, you architect your own database and built a solution, you can layer a piece of software or open data platform on top of that and manage it. And I think that's really important to David's point around the complexity wall. This idea of shifting from monolithic architectures and ERPs over to microservices was a great step forward, but you do hit this complexity wall where you have these tenuous integrations, you've got deprecations, and causing this weakest link in the chain situation where systems can go down, and it's just this really complex architecture that is just being built unbeknownst to the company. And so what we've tried to adopt is more of an 80-20 mentality, a hub and spoke model, where we're giving you a foundational layer of tooling, that 80% of common ground that you can start with, and then that last 20%, to your point, Eric, where you specialize, where you're building the innovation, the IP that you really mean to build, without all of that in your way. But of course, we're doing such, all that through standard specifications, GraphQL APIs, REST APIs, auto-documented. That's all really important so that you don't end up in this, crazy complexity wall hitting you in the face.
Yeah, no, that's right. I'll bring David back in. We got a couple minutes left in this segment. David, standards are wonderful things to have. And I remember my partner, Robin Bloor, once musing that there are two types of standards, really. The ones that we all agree upon, or the ones that are foisted upon us by superpowers. Right? And of course, Microsoft has been a superpower. They've foisted standards upon us, but we do agree on certain things. And when you agree on standards, that allows you to focus on what makes your business special, right? So instead of reinventing the wheel all the time, you can focus your energy understanding your particular business model, how you're going to use the data, how you're going to excel and sell your services and your products. I think that's wonderful. And it sounds to me like the super cloud is really kind of solving a lot of those complexity challenges for us, or at least that's the direction it's going. Is that about right?
Yeah, we should start heading to some common standards on how we're dealing with data and governance and security and FinOps and those sorts of things moving forward. And you see some sort of standardization that's moving on in between these various vendors. My line is standards won't save you. Everybody should move along in their own innovative direction and kind of understand that standards may show up and they may make things simpler for you, but you can't rely upon them showing up. So it is something that is nice to have. Ultimately, it's going to make things less complex. It's going to allow these tools to interoperate one to another. You got to remember, when supercloud, metacloud, we're integrating technology to solve the issue. But I wouldn't necessarily bet the bank that those things are going to show up and provide a huge amount of value.
On the speed of innovation, I think is part of the challenge as well, right, David? Real quick, just 1 minute. Things are changing so fast. It's got to be exciting, but also frustrating to be a CIO or a CTO, because goodness gracious, like these new projects come like Iceberg, for example, as a table in the cloud kind of thing. Real quick, the speed is part of the problem, isn't it?
Speed is part of the problem, and also the ability to easily onboard these things at the speed of need. I'll say it again. So in other words, a business needs it, pull out their credit card, they onboard it, and now they got it, and now it's part of the complexity problem.
BYOD. I remember when BYOD came in. Really, we can thank Steve Jobs and Apple, because it was that iPad. All of a sudden, senior executives showed up with an iPad, and IT's like, we don't support that. And the CEO's like, yeah, you do. You're going to start supporting it right now because I'm the CEO, and that's just the way it's going to be. And that really began this whole bring your own device thing, which is, quite frankly, is taken off. Yes, it is a complexity. Yes, it does add work to the IT side of the house, but you better get used to it because it's real. And we'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, back here on DM Radio. What an awesome panel today. We're talking to David Linthicum, Rio Shimizu, Ben Haynes, and Tammy Butow, all about cloud, supercloud, metacloud. I'm really excited about the supercloud. I'd never even heard of it until David told me. I'm a bit embarrassed about that because it's solving a lot of the problems that I've thought about for a long, long time now. It's like, geez, the amount of inefficiency that we have in these cloud environments, it kind of reminds me of code bloat. David, you probably heard of that term before. Code bloat, I learned it, 20 years ago. I was like, code bloat, what is that? And a developer said, well, the processors got so fast that we didn't have to be as lean in our code writing anymore. And so the code just got fat and a little bit lazy about stuff because we could process it quickly. And, you always want to have lean code, but code bloat is a reality. And I think complexity bloat has kind of arisen because of all this innovation that we have, because there are 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 software as a service providers just for sales and marketing alone. That is tremendous complexity, and we need to kind of rein that in. And then I look at KubeCon, for example. We went to KubeCon a few months ago, and I explained to my publisher, Kubernetes is the new foundation for enterprise computing, and certainly for the cloud as a sort of de facto operating system. Does that play into things? Because when I look at Kubernetes and when I look at this new reality of cloud, one thing that dawned on me was that we kind of sacrificed state at the altar of scale, right? Because state now has to be managed somewhere else, but we can scale out tremendously as needed thanks to Kubernetes. What are your thoughts about that trade-off, David?
Yeah, I think that Kubernetes in a federated way, and there's always a notion of federated Kubernetes, and some of the vendors are actually building federated Kubernetes things, is first and foremost on the supercloud, metacloud concept. You got to remember, app dev and app deployment is going to be a key feature of that. So in other words, it's not only just managing operational tasks and security and SecOps and cloud ops and things like that, but building and deploying these applications that are able to take advantage of the supercloud feature. So in other words, I'm able to distribute an application if I can do so, and it makes architectural sense to do so across multiple cloud providers and have aspects of it run on containers in the various cloud providers. I'm able to port applications really kind of at the speed that I need to from one provider to another. I'm able to move data around. I'm able to operate in a much more distributed, agile, and flexible way by leveraging this technology. And so if you look at what's really going to propel supercloud, metacloud kind of in the future, it's going to be the ability to reduce redundancy and simplify things and abstraction, automation, everything we talked about so far. But it's also going to be the ability to build these distributed applications. These federated applications are really going to take our development game to the next level. And I'm probably more excited about that than I am the operational aspects of it. But we're just kind of peeling the onion on what that is and looking at the technology and looking what cloud native architecture kind of means to do that. But it has huge, huge potential and kind of leveraging enterprises that really can do amazing things with very little money.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And Ben, I'll throw this one over to you. DApps are a very cool concept, by the way, distributed apps. I'm fascinated by that stuff. But when I think about the complexity of hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, now this super cloud hopefully is going to solve some of these challenges. It seems that you've built something which is very compelling to help solve those problems, because it's that layer of abstraction which allows you to keep what you're already doing. So it's certainly great for hybrid cloud, right? Can you kind of speak to that real quick about how you play into enabling true hybrid cloud and multi-cloud?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the first thing to say is that you can't predict how things need to be deployed. You need to have, the softwares need to support, on-prem self-hosting. They need to support a managed cloud offering as well as hybrid solutions. We have one called BYODB, a bring your own database, where that stays in situ on-prem, and you connect that through a remote database connection up to the software for the suite of tooling. But beyond just networking your infrastructure together in a multi-cloud situation, you have to unify that data through APIs in some sort of portal. And that's a different ask. And so when we're looking at the nuanced needs of a customer, they maybe are running on Postgres or Aurora, or maybe they're doing an IoT fleet on SQLite. We have public sector, the US government using us air-gapped on naval ships. Clearly that's not networked. And then we have support for things like Cockroach Database, which is a distributed data store in and of itself. Bringing all those things together, minus the air-gapped solutions, you need to be able to provide portals and APIs and connectivity that give a unified experience. And that's what we're trying to do on the data and software side. It's a really interesting place to be, because you have to solve the infrastructure side first and make sure that they can all speak to each other, that you have a unified way to provision and orchestrate all of this, Kubernetes, which, our system's cloud native, et cetera. But the software side is equally important for the end user, especially for us where we're dealing with non-technical users in our open source data platform.
Yeah, and you used the magic word. You must have been reading my mind, because I was going to throw this out there, and maybe I'll throw it over to Tammy to comment on cloud native, right? What exactly does cloud native mean? And for the benefit of our radio audience out there, really it means designed to operate in any cloud, right? Theoretically, that's what it should be. If something is cloud native, you should be able to take it from one cloud and put it in another cloud and it still works. Tammy, what do you think about all that? And do you think cloud native is key to our success here?
Yeah, I love getting thrown this question because I'm actually a Cloud Native Computing Foundation CNCF ambassador. And so, yeah, it's a big thing that I'm really excited about, part of the Linux Foundation. So great question to throw to me, Eric. And yeah, for me, like the interesting thing that I always think about when it comes to cloud native too, is this idea that before we used to build for on-prem, we would build for our data center. And now we're not. We're building software which is for the cloud. It's built for the cloud. Yes, you want to make it portable as well. You should be able to take your, your technology, your software from AWS over to Azure. I have a lot of friends also that work in banking that are doing hybrid cloud and multi-cloud right now, 3 or 4 different cloud providers. And they're doing that because of a few reasons. Like one is reliability, because if there's an outage in a data center, they want to make sure that their customers don't have any impact. The other is cost, this idea of like being able to like quickly say, well, we're going to use some servers over here because they're cheaper. Just like the idea of when you're going to get like fuel or petrol, from the gas station, you pick where to go based on the price. So people are definitely doing that in the finance industry right now, because money matters when you're like at large scale infrastructure. It really does matter a lot. So yeah. It's very interesting. I think it's a cool space to look into. Definitely check out the Linux Foundation too, for all the listeners that haven't looked into that yet. It's a great organization to belong to.
Yeah, Linux Foundation, the CNCF, it's all really, really good stuff. And Rio, I'll throw it back over to you just for some comments on the importance of all this stuff for financial services. Again, fintech has been really at the forefront of a lot of these innovations because you kind of had to be, because money is involved, right? So security is very important. Data governance is very important. And that kind of plays into how you designed your system, right? With your highly opinionated models and so forth. Tell us real quick about that.
Yeah, so in the earlier days of our company, back in 2017 or so, I found myself in a situation needing to explain to my friends and families, as well as the colleagues and prospective customers, what Beacon is. And in the beginning, I used to say that our product is an enterprise innovation platform, but no one really understood what that meant. So I switched tactics and started using analogies, because it simplifies stuff and makes things a bit more concrete for people. And so in this analogy, cloud vendors like AWS or Azure or GCP are the modern day equivalent of PC manufacturers. And then our product we call Beacon Core is analog to something like Microsoft Windows, right? Just like Windows abstracts away the underlying PC hardware and provides a common runtime for apps, Beacon Core abstracts away the underlying cloud providers to create a seamless runtime, dev in a broad environment, and so on and so forth. And also provides for an application layer that makes it useful for end users. So it's kind of like a cloud operating system, right?
That's very interesting, because that's kind of how I viewed Kubernetes. And it was actually just a few weeks ago that someone pointed out to me that I'll throw this over to David, that Red Hat or OpenShift is really just Kubernetes with an IBM bow tie on it. Is that was that about right?
I've never heard that. Can't comment on that. But Kubernetes ultimately is going to be the operating system for a lot of what is going to be supercloud, metacloud. If you think about what it does and the capabilities it's able to do, it's open environment. People can extend upon it. It's very flexible and durable. So this is something that's really going to take that game to the next level.
Yeah, and just to real quick explain for our audience, what's cool about Kubernetes is that it abstracted away the need to write for this particular operating system or that particular operating system, right? And I remember back in the days, maybe we could talk about this in the podcast bonus segment. I remember, let's say in the early aughts, for example, you would go buy an application and say, okay, well, which operating system do you have? And it would be Mac OS. Then there would be like 13 different versions of Microsoft operating systems. And I think that was kind of the Achilles heel of the Microsoft world, is that you had all these, you had Microsoft Server, NT, all these different operating systems, which were great because they solved particular problems, but that created complexity, which wound up being a bit of an Achilles heel. Is that about right, David?
That is very right. The more complex that you have, and the more options that you have, and the more options that are going to need native software to run on it that are built in a certain way, the more limiting you're going to have in the market. And that's just the way it is.
Yeah. Excellent point. Well, podcast bonus segment is up next, folks. If you want to be in the show, send me an email, info@dmradio.biz. That comes right to me. We're booking out the rest of the year now. Our 15th, or actually, we've begun our 16th year. We were born 15 years ago in February in 2008. It's been a lot of fun. Don't touch that dial, folks. Podcast bonus segment up next. You are listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment here on our show today. Why cloud computing's rocks, silver linings abound. They're all over the place. And our good buddy, David Linthicum, thanks so much for joining us today, David. You turned me on to the supercloud. I'm all in it now, man. I'm like, I want to get Marvel Comics to sponsor the supercloud to solve these problems. Because again, if so many services are in the cloud, there must be a way to simplify the orchestration of all that functionality and make it faster, make it leaner. I mean, I'm noticing some of my SaaS providers are getting kind of slow. Like when I go to click from one phase to the other, it's like, okay, spinning wheel, let's go as we load this next section. Supercloud, I think, is going to save us. What's your advice for folks to be able to get into the game?
I think planning is the biggest thing. Think strategically about this technology. If you think about supercloud, metacloud, you're not going to win that game unless you think strategically about how you're going to configure that technology to be successful. And we kind of got into the complexity issue around kind of a lack of planning and kind of just adding things willy-nilly as we needed that the business, that whatever the business needed to support without any kind of strategy and plan for how we're going to use it. So we did a survey at Deloitte and, looked at, 100 companies and who's successful and who's not successful in the cloud. The reality is those that did the planning are going to be successful, have a huge amount of value that comes back from the business. Those that did not are going to find the opposite.
Wow. Planning. It's important. Dwight D. Eisenhower, I believe, once said, I've always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. Well, I love that one because it kind of speaks to the knowledge and the wisdom that you gain in the process of planning, right? Even if your plan doesn't work out, because you did the planning exercise, real quick, back to you, David, you came up with a lot of contingencies, and probably one or more of those are going to materialize and go, aha, that's what I thought was going to happen. That's why planning is so indispensable, right, David?
Yeah, you always have a plan B and a plan C, and kind of plan for things not working. That's kind of the way it works in the world of technology. And so you're going to put a couple of things together you expected to work that aren't going to work. Your ability to have contingent planning and kind of taking your business to the next level is going to drive success. But if you don't have a plan, you're just making lots of mistakes until one works, and you're typically not going to get at the most optimized solution doing it that way.
Yeah, that's great. And what a great segue for Tammy Butow from Statype, because planning for things to not work, that's what chaos engineering is all about, right? Chaos engineering is sending out the little chaos monkey, I think it was Netflix that did it first, to intentionally break things such that you can make more durable systems. I remember learning about thinking that is a bold plan. That is audacious, and it's absolutely brilliant. And you know a lot about it. Tell us about chaos engineering real quick.
Yeah, I've been practicing it since 2010 back in Australia at a bank. So great place to start doing it. And I really strongly believe in chaos engineering. I've actually done it a lot myself with Kubernetes as well, which we talked about earlier. And I actually was able to find like a lot of serious bugs, like with Azure, actually, their AKS, like Kubernetes product, we're able to report those back, share them. So there's just like a lot of issues that you can identify when you practice chaos engineering. One of the, most important things to test that people don't think about is your own monitoring, your own alerting. Like, is it actually monitoring your systems correctly? Like, most people don't test the monitoring. So that's a really good place, easy place to start. Just, bring down some servers, spike some CPU, check that you can actually see that, make a service disappear. You could do a black hole attack. That's what we call it. You can just like take down a container in Kubernetes, see if it comes back automatically as expected. For a lot of people, it doesn't. So these are like very simple, easy to do types of chaos engineering experiments, but they're also so important because if you don't do it, it's going to happen at 2 a.m. So I'm definitely a big fan of that.
Yeah, I love that concept. I think it's absolutely fascinating, and you learn so much from it, right? From pulling servers down. There was a guy in a show probably 10, 12 years ago who said one of his favorite tactics, and Rio, I'll throw this one over to you, was just to turn something off, just like Tammy said, turn something off and see who complains. Right? Have you ever done that, Rio?
Yeah, all the time.
Is that just wait and see who complains, right? Like,
Yeah,
what
exactly.
the hell's going on? Because if no one complains ever, well, then maybe no one was using it in the first place, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Okay, final comments from Ben Haynes of Directus. Gosh, there's so much to learn. I mean, Wikipedia is a tremendous resource. Languages, and hop into languages, hop on a ChatGPT, which, by the way, I figured out a few weeks ago on a show. I'm like, if ChatGPT can write in English and French and German and other languages, I'll bet it can write in code too. And the short answer is yes, it can. But what's your advice for aspiring listeners who want to do something new and interesting, Ben?
Well, just on the ChatGPT side, I mean, you've got GitHub Copilot, which right there is the AI writing in code. I think that's pretty amazing.
Right.
We're looking, on the data side, we're looking at, bridging the gap from no code, non-technical users to technical. Can you say, this is the data model I want, and have AI generate out, a JSON or SQL data model that says, here are the tables, the columns, et cetera. And how do you fact check that to make sure it's optimized? And really, at the end of the day, as everyone here has mentioned, nothing is optimized. You always have to assume things will be suboptimal, that plans won't work out, and nothing's really going to be future-proof. So preparing for the unknown, staying flexible, choosing open and extensible solutions is really the name of the game in our eyes. Really just trying to avoid those band-aids and any technical debt so that you maintain that ability to move quickly, but efficiently. You don't want to, sort of paint yourself into a corner. So
Yeah.
distilling all that complexity down into a single foundational platform and then specializing from there seems to be a really good path forward.
I love it. And look up the open data platform, folks. That's what caught my eye. Well, great show today. Look all these folks up online: David Linthicum, Rio Shimizu, Tammy Butow, and Ben Haynes. This has been DM Radio. We'll talk to you next week, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.